Captain Elias Carter stood at the edge of the observation deck, gazing out at the swirling, vibrant colors of the Giran homeworld. It was beautiful, and in some strange way, it almost felt like a dream. He had been chosen for this mission to represent humanity in what could be the most important diplomatic talks of the century. The Terran government had finally convinced the Girans to meet with humans, but no one really knew why. The Girans were a species of reptilian-like creatures with scales, sharp teeth, and eyes that glowed with intelligence and coldness. They were powerful, fearsome warriors, and their empire had lasted for centuries. But now, rumors of an unknown enemy, the Cathari, had begun to spread through their ranks. The Cathari were unlike anything humanity had faced, a species of biomechanical monsters who adapted to every weapon thrown at them. Elias had studied the Girans for years, but nothing could prepare him for the reality of being on their homeworld. It was a strange mix of ancient architecture and cutting-edge technology, a place where nature and machinery worked in perfect harmony. Elias could feel the weight of history pressing down on him as he walked through the grand corridors of the royal palace, his boots clicking against the smooth floor. He was escorted by a group of Giran soldiers, their cold, unblinking eyes trained on him as they led him deeper into the palace. He had been briefed on the customs of the Girans, but it wasn't enough. No one had told him what to expect during this meeting, and he was beginning to feel like he was stepping into something far bigger than he could handle. Finally, they reached a massive chamber. The doors opened with a soft hiss, revealing an enormous room filled with strange alien artifacts. The air was thick with the scent of incense, and the dim light from glowing crystals created an eerie atmosphere. At the center of the room stood a woman, the Giran princess, Thyleth. She was tall, with dark green scales that shimmered in the dim light. Her eyes were the brightest shade of yellow, glowing like twin suns. Elias froze. The princess was naked, completely, utterly nude. His heart skipped a beat. His mind raced as he tried to process what was happening. He had expected many things: formality, tradition, perhaps even some kind of ritual, but not this. He felt his face flush with embarrassment. Was this some Giran custom he hadn't been briefed on? He quickly averted his gaze, but the damage had been done. Xyleth's expression was unreadable at first, but then her eyes widened. She blinked, clearly taken aback. For a long moment, neither of them moved. The silence between them was deafening. The Giran guards behind Elias tensed, and he could feel the weight of their stares as well. It was clear that something had gone horribly wrong. Elias stammered, unsure of what to say or do. His mind was racing, trying to find a way to smooth over the situation. But all that came out was a weak apology, and the tension in the air only grew thicker. This was not how he imagined his first meeting with the Giran royal family would go. Elias stood frozen, feeling like the ground had fallen out from beneath him. His mind scrambled for a way to fix the situation, but nothing came to him. Princess Thyleth, her tall, lithe form standing in front of him, remained still, her yellow eyes narrowing as she studied him. There was a coldness in her gaze, but there was something else there too, a hint of curiosity mixed with surprise. For a long moment, neither of them moved. Elias wanted to speak, to apologize, but he didn't know what to say. His eyes darted around the room, looking for a way out. The Giran guards had not moved either, though their stiff postures seemed to grow even more rigid with each passing second. Captain Elias Carter. Xyleth's voice finally broke the silence. Her words were slow, measured, and cool. "I trust you have a good explanation for this." She glanced down at her own naked body, then back at him. The silence grew thicker. Her tone was not angry, but it was certainly not welcoming either. Elias' heart raced, panic rising in his chest. He wanted to explain himself, but how could he? No one had told him anything about Giran customs. He knew they were an ancient race, but their traditions were wrapped in mystery, even to the highest levels of human diplomats. I didn't know," Elias stammered, trying to find his voice. He could feel his face turning hot, the flush of embarrassment burning his skin. I didn't know this was how. This is how. Explain yourself, Terran, she interrupted, her voice sharp now. Explain why you have come into my presence and ruined my ritual. Ritual? Elias felt his brain freeze. This wasn't a formal diplomatic meeting. This was some kind of ancient Sharon ceremony. He hadn't been briefed on anything like this. His thoughts were a whirlwind. Did this mean he had broken some ancient law? Would this destroy the mission? I didn't mean any disrespect, Elias said, his words feeling hollow even to him. I thought we were. You thought? Syleth cut him off again, a flicker of irritation crossing her face. Her posture shifted from stiff to one of caution, and her eyes softened slightly, though the tension in the room didn't ease. Elias took a breath, trying to steady his nerves. I was told the diplomatic meeting was today. No one mentioned anything about a ritual. A few of the guards glanced at each other, their expressions unreadable. Xylith, however, seemed to soften, though only slightly. Her yellow eyes regarded him with more thought now. You did not know. You are fortunate, Terran, that you are not in worse trouble. Her tone didn't soften much, but there was a flicker of something that resembled pity in her gaze. The meeting is still set to take place, but you will be tested, Captain Carter. Not by words, but by actions. Elias nodded quickly, relief flooding him. At least he wasn't being immediately thrown out of the palace, or worse. He felt his heart rate begin to slow, but the weight of what had just happened still hung over him. This meeting was not going as planned. I understand, Elias said quietly, still unsure what would happen next. But one thing was clear. The Gyrans were a people of strict customs, and if he was going to make this mission work, he would have to learn them fast. Princess Syleth turned away from him and gestured for him to follow. You have proven yourself worthy of a test. Let us see if you are worthy of the Sharon throne. Elias followed Princess Syleth down the long corridor, his mind still reeling from the awkward encounter. He couldn't shake the feeling that he had just made a massive mistake, and now his only hope was that this trial would not end with him being thrown off the planet, or worse, imprisoned. Syleth didn't say a word as they walked, but Elias noticed her sharp, calculating gaze. It was as though she was studying him, looking for something beyond his human exterior. The tension between them was thick, and Elias couldn't help but wonder what kind of test awaited him. After what felt like an eternity, they reached a large open chamber. The room was circular, with walls made of polished stone that seemed to absorb the light. In the center of the room was a raised platform, surrounded by Jiren guards. The air was heavy with anticipation, and Elias felt a chill run down his spine. This wasn't some simple misunderstanding. It was a serious trial, and he was about to face it. The Jiren warriors standing at attention did not speak. Their reptilian eyes followed Elias, but they made no move. Syleth turned to him, her yellow eyes glowing with intensity. This is the trial of worth, she said, her voice steady but full of authority. You will fight one of our finest warriors. If you succeed, you will have earned your place here. If you fail, you will leave this palace, and your mission will be over. Elias swallowed hard. He had been trained in hand-to-hand combat, but facing a Jiren warrior was something he had never imagined. The Gyrans were taller and stronger than humans, and their combat skills were legendary. He had to be smart. There was no way brute strength would win this fight. Before he could respond, a massive figure stepped forward from the line of guards. The warrior was easily 2 feet taller than Elias, his green scales shimmering under the lights. His muscles rippled beneath his armor, and his glowing eyes locked onto Elias with cold, unblinking focus. Do you accept the trial, human? The Jiren warrior asked in a deep, rumbling voice. There was no trace of kindness or mercy in his tone. Elias could feel the weight of his presence like a stone pressing down on him. I accept, Elias replied, his voice steady, though inside his heart was racing. He couldn't back down now. not with the entire mission on the line. Xylith nodded and stepped back, allowing the two to face off on the raised platform. The guards around the room stood still, watching in silence. The air was thick with tension, and Elias could hear his own heartbeat pounding in his ears. The Jaren warrior made the first move, charging forward with impressive speed. Elias barely had time to react before the warrior swung a powerful fist toward him. Elias ducked and rolled to the side, narrowly avoiding the blow. His mind raced. This was no ordinary fight. He needed to outthink this giant, not outmuscle him. Elias quickly regained his footing, circling the warrior, looking for an opening. The Jaren swung again, but this time, Elias was ready. He grabbed the warrior's arm and used his own momentum to flip him onto the ground. It was a risky move, but it worked. The warrior growled in frustration and scrambled to his feet, but Elias was already moving. He dodged and weaved, using every bit of his agility and speed to avoid the warrior's crushing strikes. Elias's heart raced, but his mind was clear. He couldn't afford to let fear take over. He had to survive this trial. Xylith watched the fight with sharp eyes, her face unreadable. The fight wasn't just a test of strength, it was a test of resolve. Would Elias prove that humanity's greatest strength was not physical power, but the ability to adapt, think, and fight smart? Elias's muscles were sore, his body already feeling the effects of the brutal combat. The Jaren warrior had been strong, powerful beyond anything he had experienced. But Elias had used his mind, his speed, and his human resourcefulness to keep himself in the fight. As the warrior got back to his feet again, Elias's eyes never left him. His body ached, but he couldn't show weakness. Not now. Every move had to count. The warrior charged again, but this time, Elias was ready. He dodged, moving with the grace of someone who had spent years perfecting the art of evasion, and then countered with a quick strike to the warrior's side. The blow hit hard, but it wasn't enough to take the warrior down. He roared in anger, spinning around with a powerful kick aimed at Elias. Elias dove to the ground, narrowly avoiding the attack. He rolled back onto his feet, his heart racing. He couldn't keep dodging forever. The warrior's attacks were relentless. Elias needed to end this fight. With a deep breath, Elias did something unexpected. Instead of trying to dodge again, he closed the distance between them. The warrior's eyes widened in surprise, not expecting the human to attack so boldly. Elias seized the opening. He used his momentum to grab the warrior's arm, twisting it behind a larger Jaren's back. The warrior grunted, trying to fight back, but Elias used his own weight to force the Jaren down to the ground. Elias quickly shifted position, twisting the warrior's arm into an uncomfortable hold, his elbow pointing in the wrong direction. The warrior struggled, but Elias didn't give an inch. He had the advantage. He had to keep it. There was a moment of silence. The guards were watching, waiting for the Jaren to break free. But the warrior stopped moving, his body going still in defeat. Xylith's eyes flickered with surprise, and she stepped forward, her voice ringing through the room. "Enough," she commanded. Elias released the warrior, stepping back quickly. He was breathing heavily, his body exhausted, but his eyes remained locked on the princess. The Jaren warrior stood, rubbing his arm, his expression dark. He didn't seem happy, but there was a new respect in his gaze. Xylith stepped forward, her expression unreadable. She looked at the defeated warrior, then back at Elias. "You have proven yourself," she said quietly. Her voice was still cold, but there was a hint of respect in her words now. "You may not have the strength of a Jaren, but you have something we value above all else. The ability to think. The ability to adapt." Elias took a slow breath, trying to steady himself. He had won, but he wasn't sure how much had been the human edge, and how much had been sheer luck. Either way, he had made it. The mission wasn't over. Xylith's eyes softened slightly, and she gave a nod. "Your trial is complete. The Jirans will not stand in your way." She turned to the guards, signaling them to move away. As Elias stood there, his muscles aching and his breath shallow, he couldn't help but feel a sense of triumph. It wasn't just about strength. Humanity's greatest weapon wasn't power. It was the ability to learn, to adapt, and to think quickly in the face of danger. And it was that which had won him the respect of the Gyrans. Elias had barely caught his breath when Princess Sylith motioned for him to follow. She turned on her heels and walked briskly, her steps echoing through the stone halls of the palace. Elias followed her, still feeling the aftershocks of the fight. But he knew this wasn't the time to rest. There was something more happening here, something beyond the trial. Sylith's expression had shifted from cold to thoughtful, and Elias could tell she had more to say. As they walked, Sylith didn't speak. Her yellow eyes were focused, intense, like she was deep in thought. Elias felt a strange mix of relief and curiosity. He had passed the trial, but that was just the beginning. He was about to learn something far more important. They reached a door, far grander than the others Elias had seen. It was made of dark metal, etched with symbols that seemed to shimmer in the light. Sylith stopped before the door and turned to face him. "This," she said quietly, "is where you learn the truth." The door slid open with a low hiss, revealing a small chamber. Inside, a table was covered with star maps and holographic displays. There were no guards here, only a few Ghyran advisors, who looked up when they entered. Sylith waved them off with a glance, then gestured for Elias to sit at the table. Elias took a seat, his mind racing. He hadn't expected this. He thought he was here to talk about the Alliance, to discuss peace with the Gyrans. But the serious tone in Sylith's voice told him that wasn't the real reason. Sylith stood by the table, her eyes on the holograms. "You've heard of the Cathari, I assume," she began. Elias nodded, his mind immediately going back to the stories of the biomechanical invaders who had been wreaking havoc on the galaxy. The Gyrans had fought them off before, but their forces were dwindling. The Cathari were relentless, adapting to every weapon the Gyrans threw at them. "They are not just invaders," Sylith continued. "They are hunters, and they are targeting us for something far more dangerous than resources." Elias leaned forward. "What do you mean?" Sylith's face darkened. "The Cathari have a unique ability. They don't just conquer, they learn. They assimilate the genetic material of the species they defeat. They adapt to every form of technology, every weapon, and every strategy. It makes them nearly unstoppable." Elias's mind raced. "So, they're evolving, getting stronger." "Exactly," Sylith replied. "And the worst part is that they're after more than just us. They have already begun to attack other species, species far beyond our reach. If they succeed in destroying the Gyrans, they will turn their sights on Earth." The weight of her words hit Elias hard. This wasn't just a war. It was a fight for survival, for humanity's very existence. He had come to Ghyran space thinking he was here to negotiate peace. But now, it was clear. Humanity was in more danger than he had ever imagined. Sylith turned to him, her eyes locking onto his with a new intensity. "This is why we need you, Elias. We need the Terrans' strength, their cunning, and their adaptability. Together, we can stop the Cathari before they wipe us out completely." Elias didn't need to think long. The fate of humanity was on the line, and he wasn't about to back down. "We'll do whatever it takes," he said firmly, his voice resolute. "You're not alone in this fight." Sylith's eyes softened, a rare look of gratitude crossing her face. Then it settled. "Together, we stand a chance." Elias couldn't shake the weight of what Sylith had revealed. The Cathari were more than just a threat to the Gyrans. They were a threat to all of humanity. The thought that these invaders had already set their sights on Earth made his stomach churn. There was no time to waste. Sylith seemed to understand his thoughts. She paced around the room, her scales reflecting the soft light as she worked through her plans. Elias, on the other hand, sat still, trying to piece together what he knew. The Gyrans were fierce warriors, but even their strength hadn't been enough to stop the Catheri. It wasn't just about firepower. The Catheri adapted too quickly. They needed something more, something different. "We need to act quickly," Elias said, breaking the silence. "If they're really evolving, we won't have much time before they're able to take on Earth." Xylith paused in her pacing, turning to look at him. "Exactly. And that's where you, Terran, come in. You have a way of thinking that is different from ours. You see solutions where we might see none." Elias didn't feel like a genius, but there was something about his people. They had a way of adapting to situations that other species couldn't. Humans were relentless when it came to survival. He was proud of his race, even if it wasn't always in the most obvious ways. "So what's the plan?" Elias asked. "We need a way to fight back, and fast." Xylith walked over to the table where the holographic maps were still showing. She tapped a few controls, and a new image appeared. It was a map of a distant star system, far from the Jiran homeworld. "This is their main base of operations," she said. "The Catheri are gathering their forces here. It's well protected, but not impenetrable. We've been studying their patterns for weeks. If we strike now, while they're preparing for the next phase of their invasion, we might just have a chance to take them by surprise." Elias studied the map. The Catheri were a formidable enemy, and this base looked like a fortress. But if they could catch them off guard, it might work. He didn't want to get his hopes up, but the plan was solid. "What do you need from us?" Elias asked. "Humans have the technology and tactics, but if we're going to be working with the Jirans, we need to be prepared for anything." Xylith's eyes met his. "I have already sent word to my fleet. We will join forces, Terran and Jiran. Our warriors will fight side by side. But we need your ingenuity. We need your tactics." Elias nodded. It wasn't going to be easy, but nothing worth doing ever was. The idea of joining forces with the Jirans, of all species, still seemed strange to him. But they had one common enemy now, and that was what mattered most. "How do we begin?" Elias asked, his voice steady with determination. Xylith stepped forward, her expression fierce. "We begin by gathering our forces. We will form a strike team. You and your people will help us organize. Together, we will show the Catheri that they cannot just destroy us. We are stronger than they realize." Elias stood, his resolve growing stronger by the second. The fight ahead would be the hardest challenge humanity had ever faced, but it was a fight they couldn't afford to lose. "Let's get to work," Elias said, his voice full of purpose. Xylith gave a small nod of approval. It's time to end the Catheri threat, once and for all. The hours after Xylith's plan were filled with intense activity. The Jiran palace turned into a hub of preparation. Elias had never seen such focus. The Jiran warriors moved with military precision, gathering weapons, reviewing strategies, and preparing their ships for battle. But it wasn't just the Jirans who were readying themselves. Elias had contacted his own fleet, sending word back to Earth that the situation was urgent. Earth's military was not known for its speed, but they had to act fast. Elias found himself at a large holographic table, surrounded by Xylith and a few of her top advisors. They were discussing the best strategy for the attack on the Catheri base. The odds were stacked against them. The Catheri had been able to repel every Jiran assault so far, but this time would be different. They had a new ally, and Elias was determined to make that count. Xylith turned to him, her yellow eyes glowing with intensity. "We will strike when they least expect it. We will enter their system under the cover of the asteroid field nearby. It is our best chance to catch them off guard." Elias nodded, his fingers hovering over the control panel. "We'll need to move quickly. Once they realize we're there, they'll retaliate with everything they've got." The Jiran advisor beside Xylith spoke up, his deep voice rumbling. "We have prepared for this. Our fleet is ready to launch the assault. Your fleet, Captain, will provide support. We can do this." Elias felt a surge of confidence. The Jirans were fierce warriors, but they were also ancient and proud. They had been on the defensive for so long. Now they were working with humanity, and Elias couldn't help but feel a sense of unity between them. Together, they were stronger. "I'll make sure my fleet is in position," Elias said. "We'll work with you every step of the way." As the meeting continued, the plan came together. There was no room for mistakes. If they failed, they would not only lose the battle but risk the future of both the Gyrans and humanity. Elias knew that the success of this mission would depend on quick thinking and teamwork. They would need to strike hard and fast before the Cathari could adapt to their tactics. After the strategy meeting, Elias left the palace to meet his fleet. The ships were lined up in the docking bay, sleek and powerful, ready for action. His crew was waiting, and as he boarded his flagship, Elias could feel the weight of responsibility settling on his shoulders. The countdown began. The time had come. Elias stood at the helm of his ship, staring out at the vast expanse of space. The stars seemed to burn with intensity, as if they too were waiting for the battle to begin. His heart raced, but his mind was clear. They were ready. The combined strength of humanity and the Gyrans had the potential to change the course of the war. A voice came over the comms. "Captain Carter, we are ready for the assault. The fleet is in position." Elias gave a sharp nod. "Proceed with the mission," he said, his voice steady. "It's time to end this." With that, the fleet moved forward, heading toward the Cathari base. The battle for survival had begun. The fleet moved swiftly through the cold void of space. Elias stood at the bridge of his flagship, his eyes fixed on the path ahead. The asteroid field was their only cover, a dense cloud of rocks and debris that would shield them from the Cathari sensors. But it also meant they would have to navigate carefully. One wrong move and the entire fleet could be caught in a deadly trap. The Gyran ships, sleek and deadly, were positioned alongside the human vessels. There was a sense of unity, of purpose, that Elias had never felt before. The crew members, both human and Gyran, worked together seamlessly, communicating without hesitation. He could feel the tension in the air, but there was no fear, only determination. "Captain, we are entering the asteroid field," the helmsman called out. "Stay sharp," Elias replied, his voice calm but firm. "We can't afford any mistakes." The fleet navigated through the dense field, rocks and debris spinning around them. Elias could see the Gyran ships weaving in and out, their skill at maneuvering in tight spaces impressive. Humans and Gyrans, working together as one, were a force to be reckoned with. The minutes ticked by, the pressure mounting with each passing second. Elias's eyes never left the screen, watching for any sign of the Cathari. Then, just as they reached the edge of the field, the first sign of danger appeared. A Cathari ship, a massive, insect-like vessel, came into view, its dark form emerging from the shadows of the asteroid field. The enemy had been waiting, just out of sight. They had been expecting this. "Evasive maneuvers," Elias ordered, his voice sharp. "Prepare to engage." The Cathari ship fired, sending deadly plasma blasts toward them. The Gyran ships returned fire, but the Cathari were fast, their ships darting and weaving with an unsettling grace. Elias could feel the heat of the battle as the first explosions rocked the flagship. The shields flickered, but they held. "Status report," Elias called out, gripping the control panel. "We've lost shields on the port side, Captain. Repairs are underway," the engineer reported. "Keep the pressure on them." Elias shouted, his heart pounding. He couldn't afford to let up. They had to break through before the Cathari could reinforce their position. Silat's voice came over the comms. "We have reinforcements on the way. Hold them off just a little longer." Elias nodded, his grip tightening on the controls. The Cathari were fierce, but the humans and Gyrans were fighting with everything they had. He could see the enemy fleet beginning to form up, preparing for a counterattack. If they didn't act quickly, the battle would tip in the Cathari's favor. "Fire all weapons," Elias ordered, as the flagship launched a barrage of missiles and energy blasts toward the Cathari ships. The enemy ships scattered, but not fast enough. The missiles struck their targets, and one of the Cathari vessels exploded in a burst of fire and debris. The fleet cheered, but there was no time to celebrate. The Cathari were relentless. Brace for impact. The helmsman yelled. Another Cathari ship fired a massive energy beam, slamming into the flagship's shields. The ship rocked violently, and the lights flickered. Elias staggered, but quickly regained his balance. They weren't done yet. Keep fighting. Elias shouted, rallying his crew. We're not losing this. The battle raged on, a chaotic dance of fire and fury in the cold vacuum of space. The combined fleet pushed forward, determined to defeat the Cathari once and for all. The future of humanity, and of the Gyrans, depended on it. The battle seemed endless. Explosions echoed through space as Elias's flagship and the Gyran ships fought side by side against the relentless Cathari. The space around them was filled with flashing lights, the crackle of energy beams, and the shriek of missiles cutting through the vacuum. It was a fierce, brutal dance. Elias could feel the heat of battle, the adrenaline pumping through his veins as he watched the enemy ships fall one by one. But even as they scored victories, the Cathari weren't backing down. They had more ships, more weapons, and a terrifying ability to adapt. Elias's heart raced as he watched one of the Gyran vessels take a direct hit, its shields collapsing before the ship was engulfed in flames. It was a devastating blow, and Elias's mind screamed in frustration. Report. He called out to his communications officer. Shields are holding on the starboard side, Captain. She responded, her voice tight with stress. But we've lost communication with one of the Gyran ships. They're gone. Elias clenched his jaw. The Gyrans were fighting with everything they had, but it wasn't enough. The Cathari were adapting faster than they could predict. They needed a change in tactics, and they needed it fast. Xylith, we need a new plan. Elias shouted over the comms. We're getting overwhelmed. Xylith's voice came through, steady despite the chaos. We must strike their command ship. If we destroy it, the Cathari forces will fall into disarray. But we need a coordinated attack. Elias's mind raced. It was a risky move, but it was the only chance they had. The Cathari command ship was heavily protected, and breaking through would be almost impossible. But Elias had seen the Cathari react before. They were fast, but they weren't invincible. Listen up. Elias called to his crew. We're going after the command ship. Everyone focus fire on that target. We have one shot at this. No distractions. We break through. We end this. The crew responded with a unified roar of approval. They were tired, bruised, but they weren't giving up. Engaging now, Captain. The helmsman called out. The ship lurched forward, moving toward the heart of the Cathari formation. The Gyran ships fell in line behind, each one lining up to strike at the command ship with everything they had. The Cathari saw them coming. Their ships immediately shifted positions, trying to block their path. But this time, Elias and Xylith had prepared for this. The fleet broke off in coordinated maneuvers, dodging fire and creating a gap for the flagship to slip through. We're in, Elias shouted as their ship closed in on the command ship. Energy blasts lit up the sky, but Elias's focus was laser sharp. He could see the massive Cathari command ship ahead, its weapons firing wildly, trying to defend itself. Fire everything, Elias ordered. The flagship's weapons fired all at once, launching missiles and energy blasts toward the heart of the Cathari command ship. The enemy ship shook violently as the first blast hit. The Cathari responded, but they were too slow. The next wave of missiles slammed into the command ship's weak points. The Cathari vessel shook again, and Elias saw it begin to break apart. The massive ship shuddered, and for a moment, everything went still. The Cathari were faltering. Captain, the command ship is down, the tactical officer reported. The Cathari are retreating. A cheer erupted from the crew. Elias exhaled, relief flooding through him. They had done it. The tide had turned, but the war was not over yet. The Ktheri would be back, but now they had the upper hand. Elias looked out at the stars, the path ahead uncertain but full of hope. The battle was over, but the war was far from won. The Ktheri had been dealt a crushing blow with the destruction of their command ship, and their forces had begun to retreat. Elias watched as the remaining Ktheri ships pulled back into deep space, disappearing into the stars. The victory felt hard-earned, but it was a momentary triumph. The Ktheri were not easily defeated, and they would likely return, stronger and more dangerous. Elias stood on the bridge of his flagship, his gaze fixed on the empty space where the enemy had once been. The crew was still celebrating, but Elias could not shake the feeling that this was just the beginning of a much larger struggle. The Gyrans had fought valiantly, and humanity had proven its strength, but they had seen the Ktheri adapt before. Next time, the enemy might be ready. "Captain." Xylith's voice interrupted his thoughts, and he turned to find her approaching. "We did it, Elias. The Ktheri are retreating, and their command structure has been shattered. It's a major victory." Elias nodded, but his face remained serious. "Yes, it's a victory, but we both know it won't be the last battle. The Ktheri will return. They always do." Xylith's expression softened, understanding in her eyes. "You're right. We've won the day, but the war is not over. But together, we stand a chance." Elias met her gaze, feeling the weight of her words. The alliance between humanity and the Gyrans was still new, fragile even, but it had already proven its worth. There was strength in unity, a strength that had driven them to this moment. But it wasn't just about fighting. It was about survival. "I don't know if Earth is ready for what comes next," Elias admitted. "The Ktheri might be stronger than we ever thought. They'll adapt. We need more than just weapons. We need a plan, a real plan for the future." Xylith looked out the viewports at the fading Ktheri ships. "I agree. This is only the beginning, Elias. But we can build something better now. The alliance between our people is stronger than any weapon. We've proven that today." Elias gave a small, tired smile. "You're right. This is just the beginning. We have to be ready for whatever comes next, and we'll need everyone, humans, Gyrans, and others who are willing to fight by our side." "We will stand together," Xylith said firmly. "The Ktheri may be powerful, but they've never faced an enemy like us. We will find a way to stop them." Elias felt a surge of hope. The road ahead would be long, and there would be more battles to fight. But for the first time in a long time, he truly believed that humanity and the Gyrans could face any challenge. They had fought together, and they had won. That victory was just the beginning of something much greater. As he looked out into the vast expanse of space, Elias knew one thing for sure. The fight wasn't over, but they were no longer fighting alone. And that made all the difference. The future was uncertain, but with the strength of their alliance, they had a fighting chance.